Here we are. So you want to start?
Oh, sure. We'll do the old Pacific greeting, shall we? Malo lelei, whakalofalai atu, kia rana, ni savula vanaka, taloha ni. What else is there? Aloha?
Aloha is
That's a good one, in case we get any peeps out in Hawaii listening.
Yep.
Malo le sui fu ma lang ma, tēnā tātou katoa. I guess welcome to the Native Overstayers podcast. If you're listening to this, it's most likely that one of us has reached out to you, so thank you for listening. Isn't that right, Pat? Probably.
Thank you for listening. Indeed. Well, let us introduce ourselves as well. My name is Patrick Foster. I'm a part-time photographer and also a full-time photographer. So me and my cousin Jack here, who will introduce himself very shortly, decided to put this together just to express some of our views and our ideas in the community.
I guess I'm a jack of some trades and a master of none, but I involve myself with a few things that bring my life a bit of purpose and at the same time sort of trying to leave a bit of a legacy. And I guess that's kind of what this podcast is about. It's an opportunity for us to, I think, talk amongst ourselves and have those sorts of conversations, but also just talk to other people. Like I said, if you're listening to this podcast or watching it, we want to hear from you. Like if you have something that you want to talk about, your purpose in life, whether that be your own purpose or if God's given you that purpose, or if whatever your legacy is that you want to leave, like I said, we'd love to hear from you. Coming down to Pat's garage here. It's a very nice garage with a very nice backdrop, some good posters, and just talk. There's lots of stuff going on in the world right now that we can talk about and we can cover. So yeah.
Well, sure. All right. Where should we start, mate?
People are probably wondering why we decided to name our podcast what we did.
Mm-hmm.
Why did we name our podcast what we did?
Well, that's a very good question.
Was that my idea?
That was your idea.
Oh, it was my idea. Oh, I should probably try and think of something then.
Yeah.
I guess Native Overstayers is a bit of a play on words and terms. Native, I guess we were both born in New Zealand, so we're native to New Zealand. I'm part Māori, and I guess Māori is often referred to as natives, just like most Aboriginal cultures. Overstayers is a term that was coined back in the sort of 60s and 70s when a lot of Samoan and Pacific Island people were being deported. A lot of Samoan people, Pacific Island people came to fill the shortage, I think it was in the manufacturing industry, factories, etc., here in New Zealand. And so once the New Zealand government sort of had enough of them, they sort of sent them back to Samoa.
Yeah.
And I've heard statistics where, ironically, we weren't so much the Overstayers, it was more other groups. And you had people like the Polynesian Panthers who sort of came about after that, sort of in a bit like how they had the Black Panthers in America, civil rights and all that sort of stuff at the time. But I guess when we thought of the name of the podcast, it's a bit like African Americans, how they use the word nigger. It's a derogatory term. Obviously, we wouldn't really use that term to call other people, but because I guess we are from those groups, it's almost like a way of empowerment.
Yeah.
Because as natives, as overstayers in this country, we can use that term. We could probably have called the podcast Honky Native Overstayers, because both of you and I have white privilege. No, I mean white ancestry. That's a bit wordy, don't you think? It's a bit wordy.
It's a bit wordy, very wordy. And I think those days in the 70s with the dawn raids and things like that were a dark time, especially for our Polynesian people that were in the country at the time. So it's a thing that I don't know if it's ever really been resolved or addressed, but it is definitely a part of Pacific community's history. And I know a lot of us in the Pacific community were affected by those times. So good name, Jack. Good name. I like it.
Let's see what the people think. If you think it's a good name, let us know. If you've got suggestions for other names, we can always consider them.
Yeah, definitely. Now I guess with what's going on at the moment, the All Blacks, we just witnessed them going down to a very strong English team. Your views on that, Jack?
powerful English team. I only saw the first half of that semi-final, and even after the first 2 minutes, I thought to myself, "Good Lord, they look fitter, faster, stronger, and more skilled than the guys in white jerseys." With that, in comparison to the guys in black jerseys, if I was to put on my rugby coach's hat, like I've got a rugby coach jacket on here, it was almost like watching like a top side, like your number one team playing like the reserve side. Yeah, there's guys in that reserve team that are just as good in some ways, but the top side, or in this case England, just looked like they were more likely to score. They were just crisper, faster, and their defence. I said, we were scoreless, I think, in that first half. And I guess the big thing for me, just going throughout this week, I've had conversations with different people. People are a lot more reflective this time round. I think we have a history of overreacting when the All Blacks lose, and especially during that time where they weren't able to win a World Cup. I remember back to the '95 World Cup, watching Jonah and the boys sort of go down. But for South Africa at the time was probably a better thing, because what it meant for their country. Nelson Mandela came into power, the Rainbow Nation was born, and they won a World Cup, regardless of your views on whether Susie was real and she poisoned us. But I think seeing it this time, people are a lot more reflective. They've said, like, well, this team, they've won the last two, it's good that someone else wins, but at the same time, All Black Rugby has driven world rugby, and the standard has gone up.
That's right.
I think I saw a post by Matt Gateau, and a lot of people were reposting it, saying, exactly that. All Black Rugby has driven the standard, and they'll come back in their own time, but at the same time it's forced all these other nations like England, Australia, all these other teams to lift their standard, and we're seeing the benefits of that for them. But what do you think of the game?
Well, let me just address two things there with Susie. I've had from a very good source that was actually real.
Oh, okay.
That the All Blacks were poisoned in '95.
Good Lord.
The only two, and this is hearsay, allegedly, the only two that didn't get sick from the food was Eric Rush and Glenn Osborne. Now, I know you guys can confirm that out there. You probably know them a lot better than me, but from the source I heard, they had escaped from within the confound of the hotel and went out and got some takeaways. So they never got affected by the food poisoning. The only two All Blacks in that '95 final that weren't very ill. Like I say, I've heard it from what I believe is a good source, and I had no reason not to believe them. So, in regards to, let me just tell you a little bit about my cousin here, Jack. He's just spent the last 6 years, was it, Jay, up in Hong Kong? Playing semi-professional, professional football.
Definitely semi-professional. The level.
Rugby. He was also part of the 1999 Blues development, and has played a ton load of rugby over the years. You can just see by his ears that he is like a UFC fighter with those ears because of his scrummaging. So when Jack talks about rugby, he obviously knows what he's talking about, and obviously I like to listen when he talks about rugby. So he's been banging heads for a long time. But my views on that, on the game, were for rugby, for a world sport, I think it was a good thing that the ABs lost. Hard for me to say, love the ABs, but for world rugby it was a good thing. If the All Blacks won it again, I think rugby around the world would lose a little bit of interest. Just my views. For England to beat the All Blacks comprehensively with a very physical defensive game, that showed a lot about what they had studied and learnt about the All Black play, and just shutting them down left, right and centre was a thing to behold, really, from a former rugby player as well perspective. It was pretty admirable to see what they did, but I'm hoping South Africa win, to be honest. I don't really want the English to win.
It will be a good game. I guess we'll see how good that South African rush defence is. And probably one thing though, Pat, thank you for mentioning I've played a little bit of rugby, but I remember your days for the Mount Albert Grammar First Team, Mags, and days at the Pointshed Pirates. Like I've said to you before, bro, growing up, you were a big inspiration for me for wanting to play the game. And watching you play. And I remember when I used to come to your place and you still had the bench press, and if you're doing your exercise and training, then I'd see you play and I'd be like, I tell you what, if I train and can play half as well as you did, I might actually get to play a bit longer than sort of I'd planned to. So I think there's a bit of sporting talent in our family, and I guess there's a lot of sporting talent running around here in New Zealand. And so we obviously see a lot of them come through as All Blacks and Kiwis and Silver Ferns and Black Caps and all that sort of stuff. So it's good to see that we do punch above our weight on a world stage and become champions and stuff. But again, I guess when it comes to rugby, people have their beliefs that we should win World Cups just because we're the All Blacks, but it doesn't quite work that way. Every time. So, but good on England.
And nor should it really. I mean, because it's a game where you don't know, where you're not meant to know what the end result is. So it has been testament to the All Blacks in the past that they have been so dominant, right? They've been years ahead of other teams, but the other teams are catching up, man. They're catching up. But good luck to the South Africans this week. And the English as well.
Go on, Bucky.
Go on, Bucky.
Yeah, awesome. So I guess in terms of our podcast, I mean, you and I are quite similar in that we've sort of gone into that podcast space as listeners over the last couple of years. What are some of the podcasts you like to listen to, mate?
Well, Joe Rogan has been very influential in regards to the podcast I listen to. Joe Rogan, if you don't know, is a UFC commentator, along with the guy who used to do the Fear Factor, as well as a stand-up comedian. Joe Rogan doesn't always say things that I agree with, but the thing with his podcast is that he meets a variety of people. He's very open-minded, and he's also has a lot of interesting people on his podcast from different walks of life. He's my main source of listening material at the moment. Yourself, Jake, who do you influence?
Just like you, Jay, he's a big one. I try and catch his podcast every week. I was actually listening to he had Edward Snowden on recently, so I just started listening to that podcast.
Good podcast.
And that was a really good listen. I like people like Stefan Molyneux, who is he's on Free Domain Radio. He's probably got the biggest online philosophy podcast. He's been on I actually discovered him through JRE, and started following his material. And he talks about a lot of the issues that are sort of going on in the world today, more from a philosophical perspective, and brings a lot of light to a lot of dark areas, I guess, out there. And at the moment, probably Jordan Peterson, the Jordan Peterson podcast.
Interesting dude.
Yeah, very interesting dude.
Very controversial at times, right?
Oh, controversial. I mean, but that's probably something we can talk to a bit later. But just the whole transgender issues and all that sort of stuff, especially how it happened in his native Canada, and how it's sort of it's showing its head in different areas and sort of where we are now. But I guess the big thing, like you said about podcasts, is that it really does allow you to be in a space where you can listen, and hopefully listen actively to these long conversations that you maybe wouldn't have yourself, but would like to get a bit more information on. And we live in an age today where information and knowledge is so widely available. I mean, you and I were trying to figure out how to do something with your scanner printer actually 20 minutes ago, right? And I was like, well, how do we do it? Well, we jump on YouTube and watch a tutorial, and it's like, okay, and then that's how you can pick up skills and learn knowledge by basically just accessing the internet. Now, how is that always good and bad? Well, that's a whole conversation, debate in itself, because I was listening to, I think it was Radio NZ actually, and they had a memory expert on, and they were talking about literally memory and the internet. And how is it a good thing that we now just rely on information or technology? More technology. Is it a good thing that we just rely on our phones to find information, or should we retain that information? And as a sort of rote learning, should we go back to that? Because then are we getting slower, are we getting dumber? Some people argue for that, some people argue against it. I thought she made some good points, and it kind of reminded me of when I was at University of Auckland. When I was at school, it was all you'd learn. It was closed book exams. Was that the same for you? Closed book? Did you always have closed book exams?
Yeah.
Back in 1960?
Hey, he's down, Tiger.
Oh, sorry, mate.
He's down.
That's right. In 60, those afros back in the old mags, right? The old Tuesdays. But I remember when I got to university, we did open book exams.
Yeah.
So what I learned, and even as a teacher and marker later on, is that when it's closed book, you're actually a little bit more lenient on how you mark students' work, because they might not have the detail that you want necessarily, but under exam pressure and time pressure, you can sort of figure out what they're trying to say. Whereas with open book, because you just need to know where the information is and then you can pull it out, there needs to be a lot more detail. So in a lot of ways, I think that can it's similar with technology today. You just need to know where to look for the information.
Yeah.
But when you give your explanation of something, it better be detailed and with a lot more credence.
Yeah.
Because you have access to the information that can prove a point, as opposed to when you're just reciting stuff when you're sort of relying on memory.
Yeah.
But I mean, how do you find things? I mean, listening to podcasts or even just using technology, do you find that you're able to retain more information, or does it help? Does it hinder?
I think it helps. I do find that I retain more information, yes. Us as humans have never lived in a time where we've had access to so much information and so freely. So it's sort of uncharted sort of waters that we're in at the moment. You know, where's all this going to lead us to? I mean, if you go back 10 years and said that you could find everything you want on a black mirror or a phone or a tablet, you know, it would have been almost science fiction. It would have almost been like a Star Trek episode or something like that. But you know, it's become part and parcel of who we are now. So where is that going to take us next? What's going to happen to us as humans? You know, that we've got all this information in the palm of our hand. And what's next? Is it going to be inserted into us somewhere, or I don't know?
I think they're already doing that, aren't they? Of chips.
I think they are, man. And that's if you go back to like the Bible and stuff. That's not a good thing for us.
The end times are coming.
The end times are coming.
Tribulations are coming.
One of the four horsemen is maybe already here. I'm not sure. But interesting times, fascinating times. Times that I'm glad I'm alive. And I mean, Jack and I have both lived in the time where we've had technology and another time where we haven't. We've used to climb trees and run around outside till all hours of the night, ride our bikes everywhere, and we didn't have access to PlayStation or you know, entertainment on our phones. So we've been fortunate in that respect. A lot of kids that are born recently, they won't know the world as any different besides having access to the technology. So
I guess when we look at our own kids and we see how they've embraced technology, or how technology is such a big part of their lives, on one hand it's like, yep, it's nice for them to access that information, but on the other hand you also want them to be outside running around, scraping knees, you know, cutting themselves, not too much, but getting bruises and stuff. And I guess that's that whole, like anything in life, it's all about that balance that you get, but also just being a bit uncomfortable in life. And that's not to say that, you know, we've had especially hard lives. Actually, we've had pretty good lives, if we're honest about it. Compared to some, right? And that's, I guess, another reason for this podcast, because it's sharing our opinions. But then, if you're listening to this and you're sort of wondering, well, in terms of my life, you know, what are some of the issues that I've sort of had to deal with, and how have I dealt with them? Because I think at the same time, you know, things like when they talk about how, for example, Māori Pacific Island suicide rate is ridiculous. You know, it's crazy. And and we're not just talking young people, not just men, but we're talking older people. You know, we were just at a funeral for one of the families in our church, and you know, from one of her father committed suicide and passed away. And you know, that's kind of unheard of almost. You know, I can't say I'd heard of many elderly people committing suicide, but at the same time, it kind of makes a bit of sense if people are in pain or they feel it's their time to go. And actually, our pastor, I go to Life Church West, so shout out to them. Pastor Louis Bonifacio actually gave a really good sermon on you know, what the story of the Bible says, or the scripture says, on suicide. And a lot of it that revolves around, there are examples of how men of God, people of God, during their times, they struggled with it as well. You don't find necessarily the term suicide in the Bible, but you know, King David, Moses, all of them, Elijah, for example, were saying to God, it's better if I was dead. which in a way you can sort of interpret as saying, okay, that was kind of their way of dealing with suicide or those sorts of thoughts at the time. So I guess the point that I'm trying to make is that it's a real issue right now for our people, or for any people. And I think a bit of it is tied into the technology that we use as well. When we have social media, but how social is it?
Well, that's right.
We have access to all this information. We can talk to anyone in the world. When I was overseas, it was always nice to come back and Skype to family. But at the same time, having the social media can also isolate you. And I think that's one of the big issues going on today, whereby people are living their best life in social media or in the virtual world. And that's virtual reality, that's a whole other conversation. But it's like, if you're doing that, great. And if you're getting some pleasure or happiness from that, great, but also balance it out by sitting down with someone and just having a conversation. Like Pat said, like you said, it was like you and I, we're family, we love each other, we all agree on a lot of things, but we won't agree on everything because we're different people. But at least we can sit down together and talk about things, and then through that conversation, maybe we'll both learn something. It's kind of like that whole Socratic method of inquiry. We both learn something. We might solidify our positions, we might soften our positions, but at least we're having these conversations, and at the same time, hopefully, actively listening to each other. Because it's a bit like when you argue with someone, you kind of, like if you argue with your missus, you kind of pick up on little things. You focus on certain things instead of the whole conversation. Or is that just men?
It's just men.
That's just men. Hey, any ladies out there that want to come on and debate that, discuss that, hey, feel free to come on. But yeah, what do you think, mate?
You're right, mate. Look, it's our world is probably the most populated it's ever been, and to contradict that, there's more lonely people in this world than there's probably ever been. So it's kind of and loneliness, I think, is a great cause of sadness and darkness and depression. I mean, according to stats, our Pacific community is, especially the young, are way up there in regards to suicide. And when somebody gets to that part in their life where there's nothing but death to solve a problem, it's not good.
So definitely, if you're having those feelings, you should reach out to Lifeline. They've got the toll-free number 0508 828 865. Get in contact with them and have someone talk to them. Reach out and ask for help. We've seen a lot of male suicide, fathers, leaving kids behind, and I guess that's a scary thing for me because we're both fathers, and the idea of leaving our families behind is pretty unthinkable. But when people find themselves in that place, then they need to reach out and look for that help. So definitely encourage people to do that. But not to start our podcast episodes off on a sort of a dire note, or I guess you can only get happier from there. Mate, you went to your school reunion recently, didn't you? What was that like?
I did go to my school reunion. Shout out to Mags, through Hardship to Glory, all the boys out there. It was really good. David Tapu had organised it all, along with some of his friends from school. Realistically, I didn't really want to go along, to be honest. But once I got there, it was fantastic. It was great to see some of the old faces, ones that you didn't like at school, others that you did like, but it was good. It was good to see the boys come together again and, just relive the old days. We had our principal there that was there when I was there, Mr. Taylor. Looks like JFK.
Oh, wow.
Before he got shot.
That'd be a bit scary.
Back to the left.
Yeah.
Also Mr. Hall, who was the first principal there when I was there. And also, who else was there? Oh, there was a lot of old teachers there. Brian Murphy, who was my science teacher, I think, back in the late 80s, had just recently, this weekend, celebrated 60 years of working at Mount Albert Grammar School. 60, that's 60 years. My gosh, that's like 2 life sentences. But, hats off to the man. Tip my hat to you, sir. Thank you very much for your service to Max, and the reunion was good, bro. Really good. I really enjoyed it.
Awesome.
Yep.
So I guess in terms of this podcast, where we're going to head with it in the future, well, that's up to us really. And up to you as listeners. Like, I think if you're watching this or you're listening to this podcast and you've always wanted to sort of get into this space or come and talk about things that are important to you, hey, get in contact with us. We'd love to hear from you. You can come and co-host with us, or we'll come and interview, because I think, as I said, we live in a time where we have access to all this technology. We have opportunities to, I guess, broaden our knowledge and our experiences, and just sitting down and have a conversation with two 40-odd-year-old males from Auckland who are willing to listen. Oh, yeah, well, not 60 at least. Yeah. Could probably be a good thing for you. So I guess that's where we're trying to head with this podcast. Talking about, I guess, Māori and Pacific issues, but just what's happening around the world, good things and bad things. And I think as men as well, it's important that we're able to express ourselves, even if it's on the internet, and which will live forever, and people will see us and be like, oh yeah, these guys. But
until we blow ourselves up.
Pretty much, yeah. But I mean, what do you reckon about our podcast? Also, where do you think it should go?
We should go, well, basically wherever we want it to go, because we know some interesting people, and we hope to get them on. We hope to do at least once a week. We may do individual ones where we pop out and talk to the people that we know, just to get their points of view on life, and being Pacific, and also being any other race that we have friendships with. So
exciting times. Well, I think that's us. What do you reckon?
That's us. That's our first podcast. Thank you, anybody out there that had a listen or a watch. Appreciate it very much. Jay?
Yeah, love your feedback, and as I said, if you're keen to come on and have a chat, we'd love to have you, because I think it's a bit of therapy. It can be quite therapeutic, just to sit down and have a conversation with people, because we live in a day and age today where people probably don't do that enough. And we're not here for long, and people's stories that you can share will bring a bit of joy, and you can help remember people by hearing their stories and then sharing those stories with other people. But I'm really excited. I'm looking forward to some of the guests that we do have lined up, and hearing their stories and their perspectives, and just again sharing that knowledge with everyone else, and making everyone just a little bit richer in terms of their own knowledge and spirit as well. So awesome.
Awesome.
That's us.
Thank you very much.
See you next time.